cheap. Little two-stroke Villiers engine, of course, in there. You just kept them in the passage at home, if you like, and popped down the shop with them, or sometimes to work. Another bike well worth finding is the Sunbeam. After the war, BSA's made Sunbeams to produce a very sophisticated shaft-drive twin. But before the war, they were the big singles. Ultimate in reliability, known as the gentleman's motorcycle, and the superb finish on them was second to none, because Sunbeams also owned a firm that made paint, a sort of lacquer, and they used the bikes to advertise their product. Everything was black, whereas a lot of bikes sported their chrome finish tanks and rims. Sunbeam kept to the black, and what a superb black it was. It lasted for years. Yes, there's some fine engineering in the Sunbeam. Something different now, a little three-wheeled tricycle. It's the Bond minicar, fitted with a Villiers two-stroke engine. These little cars were designed to give a bit of weather protection to the normal motorcyclist, and very good they were too. A cruising speed of about 40 miles an hour, on a flat road that is, and a fantastic turning circle, because that engine was mounted on the front wheel and would turn through about 90 degrees. So you can just imagine the pirouette that you could get out of those, which made it a very easy vehicle to park. And a lot of the young ladies enjoyed the little Bond minicar to go to work in. Very simple in construction, but the main point was you were in the dry. Certainly not in the dry here. You would be in the sidecar. This is a good old Royal Enfield V-twin combination. And look on the right-hand side there, that's not a kickstart, that's actually a hand start. You wind them up. And that's a good old bike, belongs to a vintage motorcycle club owner that's done many a rally and many a road run. It's pretty high mileage per year. There she is, that V-twin, 1000cc engine, fixed head cylinders. Take them right off to do your decarbonising, unless you take the big plug out there and clean out, because decarbonising was quite a regular thing after about 3,000 or 4,000 miles on the old fuels back in the early pre-war days. Long before oils reached the fantastic quality that they are today, the life of a motorcycle engine was rather short, and lots of maintenance was done, hence the simplicity of their construction, so that the average owner could do most of his own work with a little bit of tinkering and a little help from his friends. Scooters too became very popular because of their weather protection. We imported a couple of ideas from abroad and also produced some of our own, and even enclosed some of our small mopeds. So here you see examples now of when, I suppose, our fraternity is getting a little softer and want a little bit better weather protection. But we went through an era when this was so. And then, of course, in the 60s, Hondas, Suzukis, as you see here, came over from Japan with their high-revving little engines, and our motorcyclists said they won't last 5 minutes, but they've certainly shown us what they can do in the motorcycle world. So now we even have Japs long enough here to be eligible for a classic bike parade. DMW made this machine, the Deemster, which was a very popular high-powered scooter, and it was popular and bought by a lot of police forces. Hence the blue light on this particular one. I don't know what force it belonged to, but it was a good sized, comfortable bike, ideal to house a bobby, and good suspension too. And here we have a typical example of a pre-war, sort of late 30s bike. Overhead valves, just separate push rod tubes, hand change, and built by BSA, as many of the pre-war bikes were. Birmingham Small Arms, the producer of bikes for everybody, has always been my statement. And here's a fine example of one of the good old reliables that they built. Rigid back end, girder forks, you see, none of the luxuries. Another example too were by Aero. Aero always made a habit of putting the dashboard in the top of the tank, which was something they continued in early post-war years. Aero, another firm that eventually amalgamated with BSA's, with no racing history, but certainly good competition history. The great Sammy Miller earned all his fame in the competition and trials world on an Aero. Now we've got another BSA here. A great name in the motorcycling world was the Round Tank BSA, and here she is, a fine example of her. Side valve engine, not belt drive. You can just see the sprocket for the rear chain drive on this particular one, but she did have the huge band brake on the back and of course carbide lighting. And what I think as youngsters, how my cousins and I just about wrecked a similar bike to this that we gave £2 for. What would it be worth today? Well, they're by way of a contrast. There's the 50s Gold Flash. Another friend of mine had one of these, nearly lost his life with it, but got better and went back motorcycling again. That's the way they made them in those days. Had them, we were only too pleased to have something that would balance on two wheels with a bit of power between our knees that you could wind up and go. And another famous name here, HRD, later to become Vincent of Stevenage. Remember, they produced those huge big twins, the Rapide and the Black Shadow. Real classic bit of engineering, this. Certainly a bike well worth looking out for, but with all these bikes, the next question is, where are we going to find them? Perhaps we can help you to take a classic motorcycle on parade.
Hello, my name is Jerry Burr. Today I'm at the Bath and West Showground at Shepton Mallet, where twice a year Palmer Snells hold a motorcycle auction. Not just any old motorbike, but classic and vintage motorcycles. And we want to take you around the area today to help you with a little bit of advice on how to buy a good second-hand classic bike, or even buy bits and pieces to add to the bike you've got. Well, I've got an old friend here with me this morning, Jeff Clue. He's the consultant here at the auction. He's also the author of many motorcycle books. Jeff, the question we want to get clear now before we talk about this buying bikes is the various categories that bikes come in. Now, we talk about vintage and we talk about the old veteran. Can you give us the dates of these?
Yes, they're fairly clear cut now because the Vintage Motorcycle Club established these some years ago, and most people now follow the broad pattern. But starts really from the year dot when they first came into being to the end of 1914, and that's what's accepted for the Pioneer run and so on.
Yeah.
Vintage runs from the beginning of 1915 right through to the end of 1930. Then you come into a pre-war category, which takes you up virtually to the wartime years, because obviously not many bikes were made during the war years. And then after that you get the post-vintage, and in the case of the Vintage Motorcycle Club, the cut-off mark is 25 years. Anything that's less than 25 years isn't eligible. Now, there is a lot of confusion over this because a lot of people use the word classic, but classic is a word you can't really define.
There's no such animal, is there?
No, so there's all kinds of interpretations of it.
That's fair enough. Well, thanks, Jeff, and we'll be chatting to you later on about any other problems we come across. Much obliged for your help.
Right, okay.
In one of these boxes, there might well be just the bit you're looking for. But for some people, they will find an item such as this old engine here, and that could be the starting point of a classic or vintage motorbike for them. It's a hard way to do it, but you take it away, and then from then on, it's a long time and a lot of expense before you find the other parts. A lot of research has to be done. You sometimes buy a box with all the bits of that motorcycle allegedly in there. But be careful, you might find bits of lawnmower or anything in the box with you. These are known as basket cases. But that's the hard way to do it. But still, some people get about it that way, and they've got the pride of having done it all themselves. But here we are. Take your pick. Well, this is the next stage up to the basket case. It's mostly there, but still lots of other bits to find. Before you consider your budget, bear in mind that you can buy something like this quite cheaply, but what are you going to spend, not only in money, but in time, renovating the saddle, buying a new one, the paintwork, are you going to do it yourself? You've got no chain, you've got to get a new chain. Your levers, can you get the correct levers? There's a lot of things to consider when you buy something in this condition. You'll often find a bike in a little bit better condition than this, it's even rideable, but it still wants more done to it. Bear in mind all those details, the costs, because it's surprising what time and money you can spend and end up with something that you spend a lot more on than you ever see for it again. Now, this is a typical example of how much work you want to do, how much you want to spend in the first place, and how much can you do. Can you get the bits for it? Can you do the paintwork? This is something you really got to consider. You can look at some of these bikes and think, yeah, I could do that, but there's a lot of work to be done and a lot to be spent on a project like this. So do you want to buy something this condition, or really go to the top and think you've got something that wants no more time or money spent on it? At the other end of the scale, we've got a little bike like this Mondial. Beautifully prepared, beautifully restored and finished bike that, in all intents and purposes, is ready for you to ride. Something to enjoy, and it's different. It's a proper showstopper. It's going to catch a lot of interested eyes wherever you go. All right, you can afford it, you're going to take it home and buy it. But if anything did go wrong, can you get the bits for it? One thing you've got to consider very seriously if you're going to buy a classic bike is how much have you got to spend? The budget. When you've saved up a certain amount of money, don't think that's all you're going to spend on that bike. You've got to have a little bit to spare because there may well be some extra bits to buy, and of course you've got to insure it. So look into all these things very carefully before you come along here prepared to pay a given amount of money.
Father, gone this morning.
Well, we've showed you the basket case and the part assembled bike, and this is what we would call well sorted and up and running. It's a nice looking bike. It's all there. Check that it's all there. Check that you got your lights are working, your cables are all working, all your levers are there, the rubbers, good exhaust pipes, and then listen to it and have a go on it. Ride it up and down the road. Check it all through, because you know, you're paying a good price for a machine like this. You aren't going to win any posh prizes with it, but you can get a lot of enjoyment, but go through everything mechanically, right from your tires, your chains, your engines, and your cycle parts. Should give you a lot of happiness then if you've got it all right. Now, if you're really looking for something nice, well, look for something in the Concours line, like this Triumph Bonneville. If you've got something like that, you'll always be welcome at a show. People will gather around because this is one of the 650 Bonnevilles and very sought after. This is something that if you spend your money on, you've got to bear in mind that you've spent a high premium and you won't have much change left out of a few £1,000s on this one. But it's nice to own, and you've got something here that hopefully you can ride and enjoy and show on many occasions. But before you buy them, make sure it's running nicely, because although the thing is in Concours condition, you want to find out what it's like inside there as well. Well, I'm now standing with Peter Clark, a well-known face, part of the furniture here at the Palmerston auctions for many, many years. Peter, now what we're doing today, we're trying to give advice to people coming along to buy a classic bike here at an auction. Now, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would suggest that they get here in reasonable time and to have the opportunity of looking at the bikes carefully, picking out the ones that they perhaps favour, and making certain that they know what they're buying.
What procedures have they got to go through to be able to take part in the auction?